If you've lived in Toronto over the last 50 years, or been a frequent visitor to our city during that time, you might well recognize the face of our next guest. Until he retired over a decade ago, Hans Gerhardt was a senior manager at the original Hyatt Hotel in Yorkville, then the Four Seasons Sheraton on Queen Street, then the general manager of Sutton Place Hotel during its heyday in the late 80s, and later a successful hotel investment executive.
Hans was born in Peenemünde in northeast Germany in the middle of World War II. At the time, his father Bernhard was literally a rocket scientist working on top secret research for the German war machine. When his father was later imprisoned in Russia at the end of the war, Hans's family endured years of abject poverty and deprivation, which makes his story of success in the Canadian hotel industry all the more remarkable. Hans, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I must say, your book, which I'll hold up right here, called Hotel Biz, is almost like reading a novel. It's just fascinating, full of great anecdotes. But let's start our discussion with when you left home at age 15, simply just to get away, because you'd kind of had it with the life that you had suffered through for those 15 years. Where did you go and how did you make out?
Well, when my father came back in 1952, which was another story, you know, how he escaped from Russia and with the help of the British intelligence, turned over to the Americans to tell them what they were doing, what he was doing in Russia at the rocket system. And but then when he came back, I was 11 years old, and he and I could not connect. And we had neighbors, you know, who worked on a ship. And this, we're talking now in the 50s, mid-50s, and they always had coffee and chocolates and cigarettes and so on, and they always told these stories of going, you know, across the oceans of the world and so on. So the little travel bug in myself kind of said so. And then when my father and I did not get along at the time, I kind of applied to be a cabin boy. I didn't run away. So I worked on a freight ship, you know, without air conditioning and all the luxuries you may think of, you know, and we traveled the world for 3 years. So that kind of was a learning lesson, and in hindsight, I would not advise it to anybody. I would advise anybody who has the opportunity to get an education, which I missed, you know, I wish I would have taken that. You know.
So from 15 to age 18
yeah.
You were traveling around and you never really settled on dry land. But when you did get back onto dry land, what happened then? What did you do?
Well, I couldn't find a job, so I took on different jobs. One interesting part, the friend of the family, he was cutting paper, you know, made paper bags and cutting paper for the butcher shops and so on. So I became a delivery driver for him, and one of my more interesting jobs was to go to the prison, the local prison, to bring in paper, you know, for the prisoners to make paper bags. And then I would go in and pick them up, and that was kind of interesting as a young man to see there and what not to do, and, you know, so.
Stay out of prison.
And so eventually I found a job as a waiter, and that got me then into the hospitality and hotel industry. And I met my wife in the 63. And my father just had passed away, and we got married in 64, and I didn't want to join the Bundeswehr in Germany, so Berlin, West Berlin at the time when the wall was there, was a great city to go to as a young person. And from there, my sister was living in Toronto, and I had been in Toronto many times because of my merchant marine years. So that's what brought me to Toronto.
Okay, but so, and it was 50 years ago, plus a week, on December 3rd, that you actually arrived in this country in 1965. So you and your wife Helga arrived in the port of Montreal to begin a new life. And tell us what that was like. What were your first impressions of Montreal and Canada?
I think Toronto has changed, or Canada has changed so much, you know, and coming from Montreal with the milk train, you know, which
was it literally the milk train?
Yeah, virtually. I explained it the other day to some young people, and they never heard of that. They heard the name milk train, but didn't know the meaning. So virtually they stopped and picked up the milk cans. The train slowed down, and somebody grabbed the cans.
Well, you got to see a lot of Canada.
Yeah, well, it was in the middle of the night, you know. So when we came to Toronto, my sister had arranged an apartment up here, and a funny little story. in Germany, we didn't have a telephone and no television, when we were living in West Berlin. And so we arrived in the middle of at 9 o'clock in the morning, so we went to bed. And at 4 o'clock, my sister called me, and I thought it was a doorbell, So I woke up and saying, "Who's calling?" And I didn't see the phone, which was standing in a bookshelf. And I went to the door, was nobody there, and eventually I answered the phone in good German manner, Hans Gerhardt, hello. And my sister put the phone next to the radio. And there was Eddie Lucer, who was a traffic helicopter flying
On CFRB.
in CFRB, and saying, "This is Eddie Lucer flying northbound, Don Valley Parkway, very heavy." I said, "Sir, could you please speak slowly? It's my first day in Canada." So this was my first phone call.
So Hans, you very quickly, though, by the time you came to Toronto, you very quickly got a job at the Walker House Hotel.
That's
which
correct.
no longer exists, but it used to be
Fine
kitty
old
corner
place,
to the Royal York at
right.
York and Front Street. And you were there, that hotel actually lasted for over 100 years, but when you were there, it was sort of on its last legs.
Right.
Tell us what you remember of Toronto, not so much the Walker House, but what you remember of Toronto in the late 60s and some of the people you served there.
Well, you have to go back. You just said, we were talking about Fred Eaton the other day, and their Eatons and Simpsons would close the curtains on Sundays so that nobody could go window shopping. There were no sporting events, and when I was working at the Walker House, the bars closed on Saturdays at 11:30 p.m.
That was
and
Toronto,
there was,
the very good.
and no liquor on Sundays. So these were dramatic, different changes. And if you go back, how the Liquor Board of Ontario actually changed. You had to write down your name, and there was no displays there. You had to rename
buy a
your name
bottle of
and
wine,
buy, and then the person went behind a wall and came back with a brown bag and flashed the label to you and gave it to you. And yet, so it's dramatically changed. And the restaurant industry, the hotels were basically the entertainment hubs in Toronto. If you look at the Westbury Hotel or the Park Plaza Hotel,
Lord Simcoe.
Lord Simcoe was a famous place, and the park just was born. So they were the entertainment hubs. And when you look at the Sheraton Center, in the 72 when they opened up, they were, had 11 bars and restaurants.
Yeah.
Today they have one.
Yeah.
They have one bar in the lobby, and the rest is all outsourced.
So from the Walker House, where did you move on to next? What
Well,
hotel?
the owner of the Walker House, and also had a hotel by the airport across from the Woodbine racetrack.
What was that
which
called?
is the Ascot Inn. And
I don't even remember that one.
There was an award-winning dining room, and I happened to be the maitre d' there, and we were the best dining room in the time, and it was not the most glorious, but the food and the service and the ambience sitting in the countryside was very nice. And then the Hyatt Regency opened up, and I started there as a director of catering. And this was really a turn off how Toronto changed, and particularly how Yorkville changed, because at this time the liquor laws did not allow you to have a drink and stand up, and you couldn't serve somebody a double drink. You had to serve 2 single drinks with 2 single mixes, to the guest, and it was these very strange laws.
Archaic rules, yeah.
And
So you had to be sitting down, and you had to have
to be
one drink
sitting
at a
down,
time.
and food had to be 40% of the sales had to be food sales.
So you couldn't overdrink then?
No.
We're going to have to fast forward
Yeah,
through
sure.
the Hyatt and through the Sheraton
Sure.
Center,
Right.
which was a huge departure for you, being such a huge hotel, convention hotel. But Sutton Place was really your crowning glory. So let's get into the Sutton Place years. And actually, your very first day on the job at Sutton Place in the mid-'80s, you ran into somebody in the lobby. Who was it?
No, actually, it was Sophia Loren who was making a movie in the hotel, and it was a very sad story. And she was, when you look at the picture, she looks very serious with a smile.
Well, in this picture, she's happy.
Yeah, she is happy there
serious.
because we are laughing. Because I said to her, I said, Miss Lauren, I said to the publicist, I said, this is my first day on the job. I really would love to meet Miss Lauren. She is one of my, heroes, or stars of the world. And so being introduced, and she says, I said, that's my first day, in the hotel, and it's so great to meet you. And she says, does it make me a virgin? And that's what this picture was taken at this moment. That's why we're laughing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you must have met so many famous and interesting people in the time you were at the Sutton Place. That was the hotel for the film set, wasn't it?
Right.
And it was sort of central for TIFF, which was just, had its headquarters there. So who were some of the other interesting people that you had the opportunity to meet? And,
if I may go back for 1 second, part of our strategy was, because with the oncoming of all the mergers and branding of hotels, we were an independent hotel, and our strategy was to stand out between all these big names, the Hyatts, the Marriotts, and so on. Was to be the home for the stars, away from home.
And independent but high end, and also catering to the entertainment
so
business.
we kind of directed our focus onto LA. I would travel 5-6 times a year to Los Angeles and knock on doors, meet the agents and meet the stars, and created friendships with them. I was living in the hotel. We had a butler, which was unusual, for the time, and we had these 10 suites on the 18th floor, which were famous. They were all beautifully decorated, suites, and so we had everybody there. From sometimes our VIP list was 40, 50 names. And
Who stands out?
Yeah.
Of all those-
Marlon Brando, Paul Newman. It's we met Sandra Bullock. When she was a young actress. A friend of mine, Michael Sloan, who was an executive producer who stayed with us for 2.5 years to do the Kung Fu series, and I actually played myself in one of the segments. And so you had so many people. And then one of my visits in Los Angeles was in '86. I went to my friend George Chrissy, who was a famous writer and did for 30 years the luncheons at the Four Seasons. And George said, when you're in LA, where would you like to go? I said, I'd like to meet Wolfgang Puck, because Wolfgang had cooked for us during the film festival the one year. And he was just starting at this time.
Started in Spago?
Spago, yeah. And, he just started. He was just then in '85, '86, just starting. So we are having dinner then as we leave. We were in company with Dudley Moore and Robert Stack, and the movie The Jewel of the Nile just had came out. And the person who played the bad guy, the sheik, was Spiros Farkas. We were just leaving, and in comes Robin Leach. And I said to Robin, and Dudley and him knew each other, and being introduced, I said, Robin, I said, you are great for my business. I'm in the hotel business. You make people dream and run away for, a weekend in a hotel, and champagne and jacuzzis and so on. And I said, I'm going down in Rio in December '86. I said, you should come down, should do a show in Rio on the hoteliers.
His show was Lifestyles of the Rich
Right.
and Famous.
I'm
Right,
sorry.
right. And everybody knew his voice and listened to his advice on
It was a hot show at the time.
Yeah.
And so we're leaving, and Robin said, he gives me his card, he said, drop me a note. So we're leaving, we're on the parking lot, and Dudley Moore said to me, he said, that will never happen. And I said, Dudley, if it does happen, you have to play the piano for me at the film festival next year in Toronto. He said, okay, so we shook hands. And long story short, Robin and I flew down to Rio, did the show. I appeared several times on the show thereafter. And Dudley, I said, Dudley, you have to play the piano. In 1968, Dudley came, and we produced together 6 sold-out shows.
Really?
In there.
At the hotel?
At the hotel.
That's fantastic. So you won all the bets, and your strategy paid off big time.
Big time.
Yeah.
And another little anecdote to that, Cleo Lane, who's sent in the clowns, did a show with Henry Mancini just the months before. And so during the press conference, I told her that Dudley was coming. She said, oh, what a coincidence. She pulls out a CD. There's her and Dudley on the cover of the CD. And I said, how does this happen? Well, Dudley was our tenant when he was a student, So by coincidence, they were in Detroit, and they appeared on the first show I did with Dudley, together with her and Johnny Douglas.
That's amazing.
Sutton Place was one of the leading hotels of the world.
Right.
There is a group called the Leading Hotels of the World. But aside from Sutton Place, which I'm sure you're going to say was one of the greats, what are some of the other hotels that you visited that really stand out in your mind for service and quality and everything you'd want in a hotel?
Well, Jim, I guess a hotel is depending on what kind of purpose you're going there for. If you're going for romance, if you're going for business, and you have some amazing companies like Four Seasons, who went into some amazing resorts, you know, which you go there for a different purpose, a conference and or for the romantic weekend. And so Ritz-Carlton, I never forget when I went to California and went to Laguna de Guel, and they opened up this amazing hotel right on the ocean. And I just stood there in the lobby and I looked down and the sun was coming in over the Pacific, and you're saying, wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Great experience.
you know, it's
yeah.
just awesome. So you have now these Polynesian hotels and people who own islands and put multi-million-dollar homes on there, and you can rent the whole island.
So
and,
very exotic
yeah,
experience.
so it depends on what your budget is, what your purpose is, and you know, one of the places I love is in Quebec City, for example, the Chateau Frontenac.
It is
you
a
know,
classic,
so it's
isn't it? Yeah.
It's a classic.
One final question about, in your book, you bemoan the fact that the hotel experience isn't as glamorous, or the attention to detail and customer service just isn't what it used to be. Do you really believe that's the case, or is it coming back?
Well, you know, the branding definitely changed the industry, and now you look at this giant merger with Marriott taking over Starwood, and that kind of changes the game totally, and also the role of the management within, you know. So I was kind of, in a way, bit of part of the brand of the Sutton Place, the individual, and today the system kind of carries, you know, the properties.
So it isn't what it used to be.
But
Well, a good friend
the
of mine-
parts are coming back.
Well, a good friend of mine says there's still grand hotels, but the grand is gone. You know.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Hans, for
You're more than
joining us.
welcome.
Thank you
It's
so
been a
much.
pleasure, and we'll be back with more Toronto Files after the break.